will you please more talk on this? Please talk more on this. Well, it's easy for people to think, let's say you're 30 years old, it's easy for you to think that you're actually 30 years old, but you're not. You're, in many ways, at least at one level of analysis, you're 3.5 billion years old, because that's approximately how long the genetic structure that has given rise to you, at least in part, has existed. And you're the consequence of this massively extensive evolutionary process extending back billions of years that's conditioned every aspect of you. So you're a very, very ancient creature from a biological perspective. And if you don't view yourself across that entire span of time, so to speak, you have the wrong idea about what it means to be a human being. And then on the cultural end of things, well, you're deeply shaped and inhibited and offered opportunity by the entire history of human cultural endeavor, which is also interacted in a causal manner with the emergence of our biology across time. And if you don't understand history, then you don't understand who you are, because you're a product of history. Everything you think, someone else already thought. Every word that you use, someone else came up with. And so, a naive person thinks, for example, that the thoughts that they have are their thoughts. The probability that you're going to have a thought that's original is extraordinarily low. And so, just to understand your own thought process, you need to be deeply, to understand your own thought process far more deeply if you were an astute student of history. You also understand the problems that confront you in the world. I mean, you're born into the world in a particular historical configuration. That's an archetypal truth. Your spirit is born into the world when the world is a certain specific way, and that certain specific way is also a consequence of vast patterns of processes that have laid themselves out on a historical time frame. I mean, just a simple example. I mean, a lot of the interpersonal complexities that young people face, say in their intimate relationships, are a direct consequence of the birth control pill. I mean, it's only been around for 50 years, so it's not deep history, but it's certainly history. And if you don't understand that birth control burst in on humanity like an atomic bomb, maybe like a hydrogen bomb, you don't understand what it is that's driving your own interpersonal problems. So there's no difference between studying history and studying psychology, and there's no difference between studying history and psychology and trying to understand who you are and what you should do. History is about you. It's not about the world, or it's about the world and you. And if you can't see the sense in it, then you're not approaching it properly, or you have bad teachers, or you don't know how to read, or something like that, because history is unbearably interesting. And so I suppose that's another marker that you can use to determine whether or not your attitude towards studying history is correct. If you're not fascinated and horrified by it, almost beyond belief, then you're not studying history properly. And I think if you were studying it properly, you'd never ask why you should study it. It would be so evident, so obvious that it was necessary. Why do humans enjoy sad stories? That's Alex Beander. Well, I don't know if they actually enjoyed them. Although I think you can make a case that they do. I mean, sometimes maybe someone's watching a story that's somewhat sentimental. That'll make them tear up. And you might say that that's an element of being sad. But I would say that's more an element of being compassionate and participating in the love and intimacy that human beings are capable of. So you can do that by proxy, and that can certainly produce sentimental emotions and nostalgic emotions, and those can be associated with tears. But you can go deeper than that and say, well, people will watch tragic stories, and that's certainly the case in any Shakespearean play, which is that people are compelled to do that is because we're compelled to understand the tragedies of our life. And so to see that tragedy laid out on a stage, which means that it's distilled and amplified in some sense, is to simultaneously engage in the problem of wrestling with what it means to exist in a tragic world. And any information you can get about that is going to be well worth the momentary negative emotion that you might experience while you're engaged in the play. So people like sad stories because life is often sad and we have to figure out how to deal with that. And stories can tell you how to deal with it well and how to deal with it badly. And that can be absurdly informative. Christianity has much historical wisdom to offer. Why is it so divided in the academy? Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Why? I am lost. I think of Christianity as science for stupid people. It's something like that. And it's often reduced to its more fundamentalist manifestation. So, the straw man version of Christianity is fundamentalist Protestantism of a sort that makes it true, and that the cosmos is roughly several thousand years old. Well, it's easy to make fun of that. I'm not sure it's so wise to make fun of it. And people generally have reasons for what they believe, and sometimes it's fear and narrow-mindedness and ignorance, but sometimes what might appear to be fear and narrow-mindedness and ignorance is actually the attempt to preserve something of extraordinary value, the value of which has not been fully articulated. I guess partly I see there's the ability for people to generate the straw man version of Christianity and then just feel intelligent by comparing their own knowledge to that. And that's pretty weak, I would say. I think Marxism contributes to it a lot. I think that the universities and our intellectual life in general is still saturated with Marxist and neo-Marxist presuppositions, and I really think that's a terrible thing. I really don't think that that's any better than having our intellectual landscape populated by neo-fascist movements. I don't see from a historical perspective that there's any reason whatsoever to assume that neo-Marxist ideas are any more morally appropriate than neo-fascist ideas. I think a lot of what drives the neo-Marxist analysis of Christianity is some of it's simple-mindedness. Marxists tend to reduce everything to power and economics. Power and economics are important, but to reduce everything to that is to reduce everything to any one thing is a mark of a weak mind. Most problems are multivariate problems, they're not univariate problems. I think there's a hatred for the responsibility that genuine Christianity lays upon a person, because at an archetypal level, if you just speak about this psychological, Jung said, for example, the soul is naturally Christian. It's a hell of a thing to say, but he had his reasons for saying that, and part of what he was saying was that, or what he believed, and Aldous Huxley talked about this a bit too, is that there are elements of Christianity that have taken conceptualization as far as it can go, and that's what makes it archetypal. So I can give you an example of that. So there's a presupposition in Christianity, speaking psychologically, that human beings make progress by making sacrifices. That's a good one. You see this acted out to begin with, to some degree, in the Old Testament, where the sacrifices that people make are are genuine archaic sacrifices. They take something that they believe has value, perhaps a prize animal, and burn it and offer it to God. And the reason that it's burned, as far as I've been able to tell, is because the archaic conception of the world was that the world was a flat disc, and on top of that disc was a bowl, and the bowl was the sky, roughly speaking, and then outside the bowl, that's where the gods existed. And I think archaic people believed that for the same reason that we feel awe when we look up in the night sky. We don't want to make the mistake that just because people didn't know some of the things they know now, that they were stupid. They looked up at the night sky or the day sky and felt awe. And part of the intuition that came along with that was that while they were looking at the night sky, they're looking into the infinite. And that's allied very tightly with divinity. So there's those ideas going in the background. Well, if you burn something and offer it to God, the smoke rises and God can detect the quality of your sacrifice. You might think, well, that's pretty simple-minded, but it's not. It's the dramatic representation of the idea. The profound idea is that sometimes in order to make things go forward, you have to let go of something that you deeply love or deeply want to do. And what it means to sacrifice is to let something go in the present so that the future can be better, or to let something go personally so that other people can have it better. And there's no difference between the idea of sacrifice and the discovery of the future. As soon as you discover the future, one of the things you realize is that you have to sacrifice things in the present so that the future manifests itself in a more acceptable manner. That's also an amazing discovery. What is the discovery human beings made? If we change our behavior in the present, better things could happen in the future. No animal has ever discovered that. So that's very tightly linked into the idea of sacrifice. So you might say, well, you have to sacrifice something of value. Which is everyone understands that. The things that their parents have done. They moved from some foreign country. They spent 18 hours a day working themselves to their fingers to the bone and laundering or dry cleaning so that their students, their children would have a richer, fuller life. They're sacrificing it. The sacrifice is based on faith, and faith is essentially a form of religion. The fundamental driving idea is that reality can be positively shaped by sacrifice. Well, that's an amazing idea. Well, so then that's the higher quality of the sacrifice, the more profound the positive effect on the future. Reasonable proposition. And so then you might say, what's the most valuable possible sacrifice? And the answer to that is, well, obviously yourself. So then you could say, well, that means that the ultimate moral injunction, is to sacrifice yourself in a manner that makes the future better. That's the central idea of Christianity, the central idea, like the central figure, mythological figure at the core of, the things that their parents have done. They moved from some foreign country. They spent 18 hours a day working themselves to their fingers, and that's allied very tightly with divinity. So there's those ideas going in the background. Well, if you burn the Testament, where the sacrifices that people make reduce everything